morning we are going to begin a series of sermons that I have titled Deconstruction and Reconstruction. And you might ask yourself, why do we need a series about this, about deconstruction and reconstruction and all those sorts of things? Well, if you study church history, throughout church history, there's always been reforms taking place. From the beginning of the church at Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came and the church was birthed, up until the present time, there's always been changes taking place. And the reason is because people grow and they change and their understandings are different, more knowledge and things like that. And so what has happened, to me anyway, what I see happening to a lot of folks, and we'll talk about it in a second, is that a lot of people have allowed a lot of things to layer over their faith life. And it's kind of like the barnacles on a ship. Every now and then you have to go in and clean them off and get it down to the pure metal. And that's what I want to do over these coming weeks and months with you, is to begin to scrape off those layers that have covered up over our faith, things that are cultural, things that are just tradition, things that are just things that have always been done, so that we can get back to the purity of the gospel and not try to mix and match what we believe. Now, this journey that we're going to take beginning today is one that not many Christians want to take. Not many Christians even know they need to take it or are even open to taking it. We just don't like change. We really don't. But what I hope that you will find if you come every week is that you're going to begin to see that your Christian life is far more vibrant when you have all the layers stripped away. It's like a ship going through the water. When the barnacles are removed, the ship goes faster. It slices the water easier. And so what I want us to do is, because we live in a difficult time that in our country and in our world, Christianity is on a decline, and we need to be a lean, mean fight machine, for lack of a better way to explain it, as we move forward. People are leaving the institutional church by the droves. They are fleeing the institutional church, or they're not even coming to it. People have found that the church as an institution very unfulfilling. They don't think it has relevance for their life today. They see it merely as an add-on obligation to their already hyper-busy lives. Why do I want to go and join up with a group that's just going to tell me more things that I have to do or more things that I can't do? I'm already busy. I'm already swamped as it is. Why do I have to do that? A friend of mine wrote a blog, and in it he said, I followed Jesus right out of the church. And that's what so many people today are doing. And why? Well, I think that there's a lot of reasons, and we're going to get into those, but not long ago, or a few months back, Dawson gave me an article, 2 articles. He put them right here for me, and it's great. And I read them, and I thought, well, those are good articles. I wonder how I'll ever be able to use those. So I just set them in my office, and then the other day I was back in there and I was reading through them again. And I thought, well, this is why I have this article, these 2 articles. One's a book review. Pardon me while I put on my readers. But I want to read you just excerpts from each of these. One is a book called Uncomfortable. And this is something he says. It's all about the church. It says, the reality of God's family is that people have different backgrounds and personalities and opinions. It's a huge calling or a huge challenge committing to a family like this. But it's not optional. Adopted sons and daughters of God can't just throw in the towel and retreat to our just-like-me friend groups and homogeneous cliques. We are aliens together, sovereignly placed together as residents in a community for such a time as this. And then he says, we are mysteriously part of a cosmic plan God has eternally known, and we have an eternal inheritance. All right, so he's saying that the church is not optional, and our life together is not optional. On the flip side, there's another article by, it's talking about a lecture that Dr. Bodie Balcom gave back in 2017 at the G3 conference, the leadership conference in Atlanta. And he's talking about, he uses the word ecclesiology, and ecclesiology is just a fancy word to say how we do church. Okay, that's all it means. It's the study of church. But he says this, we're losing the local, and there's a crisis in our ecclesiology as a result. Citing specifics, He included an aversion to church membership, people skipping from church to church, and too much dependence on books, media, and other factors beyond the local church. My prayer for you is that God would give you exactly that mentality of what goes on week in and week out in your local church. And that on our Lord's Day, every Lord's Day, you would sit there and you would realize there's something that happens here week in and week out that I cannot experience anywhere else. And then a final paragraph. If we don't understand the magnitude of the local church, if we don't appreciate the existence and nature and the purpose of the spiritual authority, then what's the difference between us and the Rotary Club? If all this is entertainment, then why bother? And then he concludes on a very salient point, one that I've heard in different ways. He says, God has a plan. It's the local church. It's plan A. There is no plan B. And another writer put it this way. He said, the greatest hope of the world is the local church. That's God's plan and God's design. So if that's God's plan and that's God's design, and if we are to follow him, if we are to walk with him, if we are to live our lives in a way that keeps us free from the barnacles that come onto our lives, free from the overlays that happen to us, how do we go about doing that? You see, what you find study after study is that overwhelmingly people throughout the world, they like Jesus. They think he was a good man, a good teacher. They don't really consider him Savior and Lord, many don't. But they have a respect for Jesus. They just simply do not have a respect for Christians. There are a lot of reasons for this. And over the course of the next several months and weeks, we're going to talk about that. But what I want to do throughout this series is to make you aware of how we got to where we are. How we got to be the movement that we are today. From before our beginnings to our present day. There's some questions that I want us to ponder. There's 4 questions. The first question is, what did the first century Christians know that we don't? You say, well, they knew Jesus. Well, no, most of the first century Christians never knew Jesus personally. He died in about AD 30, and so by the time the Christian movement started, he had already ascended into heaven. But what did they know that made him so radically different? Secondly, what made their faith so compelling? Has anybody ever told you how compelling your faith is? Probably not. Me either. Just threw it out there. But what made their faith so compelling that they would leave everything, that they would risk life, that they would risk losing property and all that they had for a message about a man named Jesus? And then third, how was it possible for Christianity to survive the death of its leader? You know, in those days, there were always people cropping up who had a movement. They had followers, and they would go around teaching and doing whatever they did, but when that leader died, the followers would fall away. They would just dissipate, disappear, and go away. But what was it about Jesus that made his followers and the movement not die? What made it so compelling? And then fourth, how is it that Christianity was not destroyed, but embraced by the very ones who wanted to annihilate it? The Roman world tried to annihilate it. Nero tried to annihilate it. Many rulers did, but ultimately the Roman Empire became a Christian nation, Christian empire, if you will. How does that occur? How does that happen? Well, to start answering these questions, we have to go back to the future. Now, I don't know, I enjoyed that movie. Y'all remember that, some of you? It's the idea that you could go back in time to see how you got here and what life was like before you were here. That's a fun concept. It's a fun thing to think about. So what we're going to do today is to go back to our beginning and then bring ourselves to present day. We have to go back to Genesis chapter 12. Everything starts in Genesis, it seems like. But we're going to go to Genesis 12. And this is where it all started. It says, now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So this is the promise right here that gets us to where we are today. Creation notwithstanding, God calling Abraham and giving Abraham this promise was the beginning of everything. What I want to do is do a sort of a speedy trip through Jewish history, through Old Testament history, and take a look at what happened and how God dealt with the nation of Israel. It's important to know. So here we go. So hold on height. So God gave Abraham a son of promise. He had a son whose name was changed to Israel, who had 12 sons. They went eventually into Egypt, and then they were in slavery there for over 400 years. God raised up a deliverer named Moses. You know about Moses. And Israel was delivered, and they went out into the desert after they crossed the Red Sea, and they camped at Mount Sinai. And while at Mount Sinai, they decided to build a golden calf because Moses was gone for too long for them. They made a golden calf, and so God punished them by making them wander in the wilderness for 40 years. But before he sent them out into the wilderness, he made a covenant with them. He made a treaty with them. That treaty is what we call a suzerainty treaty. If you've been on Wednesday night, you know what that word means. It's a bilateral treaty where both parties have certain requirements. The way I like to talk about it is, God says, if you're obedient, I'll bless you. If you're disobedient, I'll curse you. And so that was the type of relationship that God had with Israel. But here's the key point there. This is not the type of relationship that God has with us today. All right? That is not our relationship with God. That's Israel's relationship with God. But that's for a future talk. All right, so Israel then, what did they do? God gave them instructions to make a tabernacle. A tabernacle was a temporary structure that was used for them to worship God. God gave them the instructions and told them how to build it, what to put in it, and all of that. And that's how they knew that God's presence was there. They would see a cloud over it. Moses would go in and he would meet with God there in the tabernacle. At some point, though, after 40 years plus, they established themselves as a nation in the promised land. Israel said, we want to have a king. God, we love you and you're here for us, but we want an earthly king like everybody else. So God gave Israel an earthly king, and they went through many kings, David being the most prominent. David had a son. His son was named Solomon. And Solomon built God an awesome structure, a temple, permanent structure. Now, the distinguishing characteristic of the Jewish temple was not something it included that the competition lacked. It was quite the opposite. The differentiating characteristic of the Jewish temple is that it was something it lacked that everybody else had, and that was a symbol, an image. All the other gods of the world at that time, they had physical images they could see, but God said, his people don't make any of those, so they didn't. The Holy of Holies, the place where the priest would go in and make sacrifices every year, was like a beautiful ornate picture frame without a picture in it. This is why Israel didn't need a temple to begin with. They didn't need a place to go because God was with them. The distinguishing characteristic of Judaism was not the design of their temple. It was the lack of image that represented God. God didn't want or need a temple. He didn't want or need a permanent structure for them. But yet God moved in, but he wasn't committed to staying there under just any circumstance. This is important because here's why. It's because the temple was linked to God's conditional I will as long as you do covenant with the nation. The one that was established at Mount Sinai. In a very real sense, the temple was more beautiful than it was important. Think about that. The temple was more beautiful than it was important. God even told them that the temple would be destroyed, and it was. When the nation was divided up, the north and the south, Israel and Judah, the temple was destroyed by a conquering army. Eventually, both nations were in captivity, and when Babylon fell to the Persians in 538 BC by Cyrus the Great, he ordered them to go back to Jerusalem and to rebuild their temple. But it was a much smaller temple than what they had. That temple would have been the one that was destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans. So there you have it, a speedy look through the history of Israel. There are two important things to remember about Israel's relationship with God throughout the Old Covenant. That is the suzerainty treaty, if you do I will, and the temple, a place where God actually would meet with his people, and the way that the temple became the lifeblood of their community. And since the Jewish scriptures were compiled, there's 400 years elapsed between Malachi and the coming of Christ. And into that Roman world, into that temple, is where Jesus was born, when he was born. Jesus, though, he did something remarkable. He stepped into history to introduce something new. He didn't come to Jerusalem offering a new version of an old thing or an update of an existing thing. He didn't come to make things better. Jesus was sent by the Father to introduce something entirely new. But it wasn't just his message that made Jesus so compelling. It was Jesus himself. Remember I said people like Jesus, they just don't like us? People who were nothing like him liked him. And Jesus liked people who were nothing like him. Jesus invited unbelieving, misbehaving, troublemaking men and women to follow him and embrace something new. And you know what? Many of them actually accepted that invitation. As followers of Jesus, we should be known as people who like people who are nothing like us. When we invite those unbelieving, misbehaving troublemakers to join us, they should be intrigued, if not inclined, to actually accept our invitation. You see, and here's the key. The reason we need to deconstruct our faith and clean it off is this. It is the mixing and blending and integrating of the old with the new that makes the modern church so off-putting to so many people. It's the mixing and matching. Who wants to accept an invitation to join a religion? I don't. I don't need the headaches, quite honestly. I don't need the put-ons. You know, and we've talked about this before, but if you look at the root word of religion, it means to bind again. People live in bondage to sin already. Why do we want to clean them up and then bind them to a religion? It's just another form of bondage. It's bondage, however you put it. What did Jesus say he came to do? To set us free. And that's what we need to understand. I want to be a part of a movement like the first century believers were on. A movement of people whose lives were changed by Jesus. Not by simply following rules and regulations or adhering to a certain set of beliefs and not others. You know, I talked to a young woman the other day, and she was talking about how she grew up. And she said that in this particular denomination, it was kind of strict, fairly legalistic. And she said, I don't go there anymore. She said, I really don't have a desire to go there. And she said, because of it, I'm really struggling with how I even view God and how I view my spiritual life. And she told me that she went back to that church one Sunday, and one of the ladies in there told her that she was going to hell because she no longer came to that church. Who needs that? Who needs that? She's like my friend who followed Jesus right out of the church. What we need to do is realize that Jesus came to do something remarkably different. As we'll see next week, Jesus changed everything. The problem is that too many people don't want to be changed, don't want him to change anything then, and too many don't want him to change anything now. Jesus said that I came to give you life. I came to make things new. I came to give you something you could not have on your own. Any person can have a religious experience. Any person can follow a set of religious rules. It requires no faith whatsoever. But living as Jesus calls us to requires faith. It calls us to listen to his Spirit who lives inside of us. It causes us to live as servants of others. It causes us to not think about ourselves first, to think about others. It causes us to take this good news, this gospel that is so compelling to people of the first century out and not worry about ourselves, but share it because we have something that other people need. We have life. We have abundance. We have Jesus. Who we worship and serve is Jesus. We do not worship and serve a building. We do not worship and serve an image. We worship one who is spirit and truth. And over the course of the coming weeks and months, I hope that you find the purity of your faith life and that you lay aside all of those things that will bind you up and that you live free. That's what Jesus wants for us, freedom. Let's pray. Father, we are grateful that you have set us free. You have freed us from the bondage of sin. You have freed us from the bondage of religion. You have freed us from any and everything but you. But far too often we're so comfortable with the other things, the trappings, the rules and regulations, because they give us a sense of security. But that's simply not all, because we put ourselves hear, give us a heart open to understand, and allow us to know that you walk with us, no matter where we are, no matter our situations. Even if we've layered over our faith, you're still there. You got plans. But you prefer us to be free and clear so that we can see you, hear you, and understand you more clearly. We thank you